Well, thank you everyone, and welcome to our panel on how we can make marketing work harder. So, you may have heard in recent years that there's a crisis in brand effectiveness, that whatever a marketer does, the yield of their work is in decline regardless of whatever they do. But there are data points, there is work, and there's examples out there that show that this is not true. So I have a panel of experts here who are here to help you cut through the noise, who can offer you the facts and maybe some tips on how you can drive your effectiveness of your marketing. So I'm Martin O'Boyle, a media consultant, and I've got a brilliant panel of experts who I'm going to introduce now. So we've got Dean Weaving, who is Global Brand Operations Director for Deliveroo. We've got Craig Tuck, who is Chief Revenue Officer at the Ozone Project, and Tara Beard-Knowland, who is Global Consumer and Business Insights and Analytics, Marketing Operations and Product Director at GSK. Fantastic.
Nothing like a small title.
Yeah, I had to have the notes to remember that. I'm going to hand over to my panel shortly. One of the first things I think we need to almost level the field here is people may think of effectiveness in different ways for their brands. So I'm going to start with Dean and ask him, how do you judge an effectiveness for Deliveroo?
I mean, it tends to differ, if I'm completely honest. One of the things we try to do is always make sure that we're understanding our top-line business effect, right? So trying to understand how we're driving new customers, how we're driving new orders. But that's always going to be, in its sum total, what the direct impact of a campaign is having. I think the other thing that we're starting to explore a lot more now is how much of our media or how much of our campaigns is physically affecting our brand and how it's effectively building the brand and what are the other mechanics behind that. What we're also then trying to understand is of that brand, brand impact, if you will, or that brand effectiveness, how much of that is also having a long-term effect on our business goals as well. So we then start to get a lot more of a holistic view on this is how our media is having a very direct effect on our bottom line of our business, but also how our brand in totality is also affecting our long-term business growth as well. The other thing that we also need to be really concerned about to a certain point is there are so many different data points that we can latch onto now. So be that attention that someone in my team is now looking at, be that viewability, be that brand lifts in different studies. So we've had to enable ourselves to build specific models that allow us to input those data sets in different ways and forms. So then we can look at different correlations and different statistical significance to say, okay, well, we know that this data point is having a certain level of effect, and then this is driving business impact, whereas we know that if we optimize towards this specific data point, it's having no effect at all. So we try to make sure that we give the exec team what they want, which is growth, but also as a marketing team, enable ourselves to create different data sets and play around with it.
Excellent. And Tara, do you see the same at GSK, or is there something extra that you guys are doing?
I guess I would see broadly many similar things, but to build a bit on what Dean was saying, if you imagine, we talk a lot about efficiency, so doing things right, and then the next layer is of course effectiveness. So are we doing the right things? And the right things can look differently. Somebody said, I can't remember if it was maybe Julia earlier today in one of the other sessions in the other room about how you might look at different things across the funnel, as it were, different pieces that you want to activate and do. And so the goals, the return that you're trying to get to is maybe a little bit different, but having that high quality metric and not just measuring things for the sake of measuring them. We've talked a lot about that today, I think.
Excellent. And in your role as analytics and business insights, what are the things that you look at? What is the best way of measuring this effectiveness? Are there proxies that you use? I know Dean's mentioned a couple already.
So, I mean, there are so many different possibilities. I think what we try to do is to make sure that every metric that we use has some relationship back either to that long-term brand building equity piece, which in its turn needs to be linked to sales outcomes, and then those more traditional return on investment. So, we tend not to use things like click-through because we know it doesn't actually deliver the kind of value that we want it to deliver. So there's a lot of great frameworks and guides that we've got together for teams to say, in this scenario, what do you use, what do you do, how do you take it, and hopefully make it easier. It's almost as important to think about what you're not measuring as what you are measuring.
Just building on that, I think effectiveness, marketing effectiveness is not in crisis, I don't think. It's just rightfully getting its the attention. It should never have went away. It's always key to what all of us do in the room. I think that I don't envy the job that Tara and Dean have to do on behalf of their brands, because the IB released figures yesterday, £23.5 billion spent on digital in the UK last year. And in a year when we spent most of it in lockdown, that money has to provide a return on investment. And no surprise, 81% of that spend went to the big 5 businesses that have real-world consumer behaviour and data at scale that's actionable for brands to drive that ROI. So I think effectiveness is increasingly important, and it's about smart interpretation of real-world user behaviour, which the platforms tend to have.
And I think one thing, again, I've heard a fair bit today that's important to reflect on too, is test and learn is great, but there's only so many test and learns you can do. Before, what are you doing? Are you just spending all of your budget doing the test and learn after test and learn after test and learn, and then you, how do I separate this test and learn from this test and learn? And it just becomes all very enmeshed. At some point, you have to say, right, this is, for now, the way that we're going to do it to achieve this goal. And we can get, if anything, is effectiveness in crisis? No, but maybe we're in crisis over this kind of just plethora of different ways and means that we can measure things, to the point where we almost end up spending more money measuring things than we do on doing the things in the first place.
I think I'd argue that you're in crisis if you're not testing and failing. Because I think the main thing that you need to be doing is understanding what is working and what isn't working, right? And if everything that you do is working, then you're doing something wrong. Not everything will work. So as long as you're testing things and and it's failing, you're learning from it, and you're reiterating what is effective to you, then I think you're most definitely not in crisis, but actually you're probably ahead of the game, if you will.
Excellent. And Craig, in your role as Ozone Projects, what are other advertisers looking for? Are there sort of common themes that you're seeing from advertisers, and has that changed over the last few years?
Yes and no. I think there's a certain addictive nature to some digital metrics that some clients we still seem to be judged on, but I do think clients are. And I think part of effectiveness, by the way, is us proving we can be effective, and the client, working out what effective means to them. Effectiveness definition is about producing the desired outcome, desired result, success, and that's very different. And that's one thing that is true. Clients seem to have different definitions of what success is, what effectiveness is. So we are, I think, working more with clients where we have a range of different measures that we're being judged on. I'm all for that, because it moves us away from very meaningless digital metrics like CTR, CPC, VCPM, which actually ironically drive media deployment to the places that aren't driving things like the attention, and being very effective for brands in terms of brand uplift. So, we work directly with one major FMCG brand. It took us 2 years to get to this point. I did name them in our pre-call, but I won't. I'm a bit scared of naming them here and looking at all these faces. So I won't name them, but it took us 2 years to get to the point, but we're now their preferred programmatic partner. It's the directness of our relationship that's allowed us to do the things we're doing, i.e. we directly connect at scale our audiences and our premium inventory to the buying platform they use to execute media campaigns on a huge scale. And of course, cost and efficiency are utmost important, but we've found it's never perfect, we've found a very effective mix between price and efficiency and ROI and things like attention. But importantly, it's attention as they define it. We could very easily come to market and say, well, this is how Ozone Project defines attention, and we're going to measure attention for you. And a client have a completely different opinion of what attention is to them. So that's important. But yeah, more ways of measuring effectiveness, proving effectiveness are coming into the conversation, I would say.
Excellent. And would you say that's the most effective way of working in partnership with a client, as approach it like a partnership? Is that something that you're seeing from other clients as well?
Yeah, I think clients are very, very savvy, and the best relationships we have are between the agency and the client. You know, we want to work with both of them, and our bigger partnerships, our biggest business that we've done to date as the Ozone Project on behalf of our publisher owners is with agencies and clients that behave in that fashion, because, you know, the agency is really important in this. I don't envy Tara and Dean, as I said, because the amount of things you can measure now, the amount of possible options you've got is vast, and I think the agency plays a really important role in helping navigate that for clients.
I think it is definitely a partnership, and maybe if I reflect back over the course of my own career in the last couple of decades, there's been a massive shift from, you know, agencies playing more of a lead role in bringing all the newness and thinking now that's definitely not so much the case, and you know, you probably find it more frustrating than anything if you're treated like you have no idea what you're talking about. Because to reflect back on one of the earlier presentations, if data is the new energy, but everybody, like my job is data for sure, but so is Dean's, and so is the people in our finance team, and so is the job of the people in every single department. So it changes the way that we talk about things, and then it means that just having a data expert coming in from an agency doesn't really do the trick to convince us that this is how effectiveness is defined. Ooh, yeah.
Is that the noise they made?
Yes, that is absolutely the noise they made.
Have agencies done that to you? That would be a great selling tool. So, what if brands don't have first-party data? Do they need a certain level of data? Are there ways that they can operate in this space and really push their effectiveness then compared to brands who are very rich in first-party data? I think maybe Craig, that might be a good one for you.
Blimey. I agree with everything Nick said at Tesco, and I agree with everything Ross said at Asahi. I just think, you know, you can add too much salt to the recipe at times, and I think instinct is good enough in some cases to say that is the right place for our brand to be associated. There's real human beings congregating within this environment. That's where we want to communicate. I think first-party data is incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly powerful for insight. It can inform, you know, this is beyond advertising. It can inform a whole business, from new product development to direct door drop campaigns to TV creative. The insight is really powerful that comes from that. But for mass media deployment and the job of advertising to turn strangers into visitors, visitors into marketing prospects into customers, you just need to understand where you're on that journey, and sometimes first-party data is not needed, I don't think. But at other times, it definitely gives an advantage.
It's a really complicated sort of, for want of a better word, ecosystem where everything affects everything else in a way, and so it becomes very difficult to exactly tease everything apart. There's loads of great tools that can help you to do that, but none of us would have a job. Quite frankly, we wouldn't be at this conference if it were super duper easy. And so on the one hand, I'm glad because it provides me continued employment, but also it makes marketing interesting. It means we can't just outsource it all to some bit of AI that can just turn a handle and make a widget. It's not like that.
I think for brands where they're not solely built on first-party data, agencies have always been obsessed with, like, well, how do we help them create something or activate something? But I think actually the end goal, or the starting point for them, is probably at the end, and understanding, well, of the platforms or the media types that I am using where first-party data could be created, like, how am I using that to inform what I should be doing? And then instead of starting at the beginning and start at the end and then work your way back, like, because that will exist. And one of the interesting things I found in my role, especially when I'm working like with the TV teams, and we'll think about TV in a minute, but like, I know, for example, when I match my data with Channel 4, like, where my audience index from a program. And so then I'm having this conversation, well, do I buy programs as a proxy of my audience, or do I buy people? And like, we didn't need to, at some point, have to have too much first-party data to do that. Like, we can model that out. So you can have billions of rows, or you can have tens of thousands, but you can still glean enough insight that can help you do something else in the future.
Is all that time and effort going to make a massive shift? And I guess I really like what you're saying about sort of begin with the end in mind, if you will. And if you start there and you think about scenario planning, you get what you measure, right? So if you're not thinking about, oh, I can measure this, so I'm just going to keep measuring this, and then it's going to become a KPI, and then everything that we do is going to be to optimize to this thing, which does nothing for our business. And then we go, oh my God, it's all broken. And in fact, maybe just kind of scenario plan it out and think it through.
Fair enough. And so, Craig mentioned price. So I want to ask, where does price actually come into all this? We're in a market where there's quite rampant inflation across some media. And so obviously the cost media is growing, and that will have a role to play in judging effectiveness. Is there a point where that price premium sort of wipes out any value from that effectiveness piece? Dean, what do you think of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, we're in a very interesting situation at Deliveroo where when the pandemic started, I think there was a 40% drop in like the way that we buy our TVs, so based on our TVRs. And like our business was growing. So like, one, it makes it impossible for me to look back at my data because we've got this huge COVID effect. So when I try to look at efficiency, like that data is complete chaos. But we had to lean in really hard because our business was growing and media was really cheap. So it was like a perfect storm for us. Like, I know it was a very bad situation for the world, and I probably shouldn't say that on stage, but like from a media buying perspective, I was slightly happy. Now we are in a very different world where inflation has gone through the roof. Our sector has started to slow down, but it's still growing, so that's great. But it's difficult for us, right? And I could sit here, and my media team could sit here and be like, "Oh shit! Like, what are we going to do?" But actually, it creates opportunity where, like, 2 years ago, I'd be sitting on stage talking about the wonders of BVOD and data matching, and my boss would go to me, "Well, that CPM is ridiculously high. Like, how can we buy that when you look at TV prices?" And now all of a sudden, TVRs in BVOD are actually lower. I can reduce my wastage in my audience because I can be more targeted, and actually, I can do one-to-one order mapping, so I can understand things like lift and where the value is. So I think to a certain point, yes, like inflation has caused a lot of headaches, but actually it's created a lot of opportunities. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is as long as you're learning and you're taking the opportunity, like, yes, there's a problem in one place, but you're always going to be able to find another option somewhere. And yes, like inflation's only going to continue and it's going to get worse. But as long as you're trying to get around that, and Google will tell you that the answer is YouTube, and hopefully there's no Googlers here because that is not the sole answer. I think the sole answer is testing and understanding your media prices and working around it. And you have to work with your media agency as well. Like, that's not something you can solve on your own in a room, because I tried and it didn't work.
That's fair enough. So, would you say that this inflation is sort of driving, as well as effectiveness, is now driving how you sort of split between offline and online channels as such? Would you say that's having a big impact then?
To a certain point. I mean, it depends. I've got a digital background, and I sort of stepped into this world with my digital head and into my brand media world, and I try and think about things in the same way. And I guess, like, I don't want to see like things that black and white. Like, we want to see screens and we want to see like paper, and it's starting to have that mix. I mean, I had this wonderful conversation with my team recently where we ran some eye recognition software onto my out-of-home just to see the pop of our logo. And the viewability on our out-of-home is less than on Facebook. And if anyone's got any idea about the levels of viewability on Facebook, it's dog shit. So, like, how do we live in that world where, like, we've been giving Facebook grief about viewability for years, and it turns out our out-of-home, and it might just be the placements that we bought, is just as bad. So, like, we need to be more holistic about the way we think about measurement and the way we think about our media pricing, and I think that's something that's going to start to come out in the next few years.
But it's also about what you want each of those channels to do for you, right? So you might not want your out-of-home to do the same thing as you want your Facebook to do for you. And so maybe it's okay. Yeah.
I mean, no ad's okay not to be viewed.
Well, yes.
That's the main output there.
Yes.
Ross mentioned it earlier, you know, I think in Asia that campaigns with low levels of attention were generating good enough ROI in terms of sales. And to that point, it's understanding what you're trying to do. And I think effectiveness starts with understanding your audience. I think you need to understand what each channel and each media does well. I guess I've worked in digital for 15 of my years of my career, and I'm just nervous at when things start to be, premiums start to be applied to things that suddenly the industry says it wants. It smacks of media owners just trying to make a fast buck. And I think the actual fairest way to judge is was it effective? Did it work? Attention. It's perceived as more expensive and at a premium because we're being misled to believe viewability drives attention. And viewable impressions on the web, the higher the viewability, in general, they're under more demand and therefore cost more. But actually, you can look beneath the surface a little bit. And if I'm just driving a campaign towards viewability, invariably I want to buy a tiny banner on a mobile screen, and I don't think anybody would agree that I pay lots of attention to that format. So it's ironically driving me away from the thing that I'm trying to buy. So it's the partner that I talked about earlier, we're driving things that are important for them. Attention is one, and it's costing them no more than other things. The business that we've done with them over the past year, it's just a myth that it should cost more. I think it's created by some in this space.
So what sort of data then do we need? I mean, obviously attention is a big piece, and it's been talked about in many conferences here as well. Is there limitations on how we can measure things such as attention, or are the old metrics such as reach still really important? How do we balance the two?
I think it's just about being choiceful about what you're trying to do and which way you're going to measure it, because you couldn't measure the same campaign 67 different ways very easily, probably 67 million ways very easily. And, that means it's probably possible to tell whatever story you want to tell. So getting those things nailed, what do we want to try and do? Whether that's as a brand, as a company, what's our philosophy? And then what does that mean we measure? And just being persistent about that while still looking around to say, okay, are there new things that we should be bringing in, like attention? And who knows, in 5 years' time, has my reach on my brand avatar in the metaverse somehow, been what I expect it to be? Who knows where that all goes? But, making sure that you're staying on top of what's new, but also trying to understand, is that adding anything that we wouldn't have had otherwise? Is it? And therefore, do I need to throw something out? So I'm not trying to just continue to duplicate metrics and spend more and more money on metrics which tell me to make the same decision.
I think it's about being pragmatic, right? And like you said, like if I was to rock up to my next board meeting and be like, oh, our attention levels on our ads are X, Y, and Z, I'd be laughed out of the room, right? So I think it's about making sure that we have a really good fundamental understanding of the value and the effectiveness of our media, whilst like even in silos, like just testing, learning, failing, like really understanding like what's going on and like making sure we understand that data. And then once we can see that it's like measurable and scalable and valuable, like then bringing that into the mix. Because like you said, you could like have 50, 60, 70 variables. Like they're not all going to correlate. So like being smart around what data sets they are and like, I think that's the main thing, right? About being pragmatic with all those different data sets.
So is that what we would need then to sort of, for the brands that are out here in the audience, if we want to sort of instill a culture of effectiveness in their marketing departments, is that what they need? Is sort of, pragmatic approach, test and learn and fail, move quickly? Are there other things that you've seen that help to really drive that? Maybe Tara?
But for me, first of all, it's what do we mean by effectiveness? Just making sure you're really clear across the whole business. This is what we mean by effectiveness. Once you know what you mean, then you can say, okay, so how do we gauge whether we're doing that job? So are we getting the ultimate sales? Is that building our brands? Are we, in our case, delivering better everyday health with humanity, ultimately resulting in long-term sales? So those are the important things, and that's the place to start.
Fair enough.
No. To go a bit deeper, if you want to instill cultural effectiveness in your department, your team, it's to represent that culture, I think. I mean, how can you pretend with one biased view of the world to represent everybody you're trying to reach with your comms? I don't think, and we're doing some really interesting work with some very, niche to me, but underrepresented publisher groups to offer our technology and resources to have them better represented and to pick up more of the demand that exists in the programmatic ecosystem. If we can understand our audience better, we might understand that they give a shit about the climate. There was a great presentation at IB Engage yesterday Sorry, Mediatel. And they talked about 85,000 garbage trucks full of clothes that are ordered and immediately sent back I think it's every day globally. 85,000. This is what's called bracketing. So people overorder because they don't want to go to shops anymore because we're used to everything being on digital platforms. They'll overorder knowing they're going to send back 2 or 3 items. Under a certain price point, those clothes are not restocked. They're put in landfill. AR is a really effective means if you as a brand stand for something in that area to combat that. You know, these specs are new. I'm really proud of them. On Oliver People's website, there is an app, and I tried them on virtually through AR technology. When they arrived, they look exactly as they did on the website. Prevented me having to send something back. It's small things that matter, and if you understand your audience, you can understand the things that matter to them, and I think you can organise yourself accordingly then with your comms.
Well said. Now, we've only got a few minutes left, so to wrap up, I think we've got, as I say, a number of brands and advertisers in the room. Panel of experts, do you have any tips here as to how they can drive their strategies forward in the future that you haven't already said?
I think for me, like we've said it, but I think like having a very strong line in the sand on what are the core things that are effective to you and how you understand like what that affect, like what builds that effective model, so to speak. But then also making sure that you're consistently testing, because like the world is ever changing, be that through the fancy technology that you might be using or everything else that exists, right? And I think if you're blind to the things that could add value, then you're never going to move forward, right? So I think it is like making sure that you truly understand, like, this is where I draw the line, but I'm also going to go and have a play around here and make sure that I get a better view of the things that could change my world.
Yeah, a sandbox of some kind is really helpful. The thing is, there's loads of great kind of different ways of thinking about it, different agencies who do different things, but it is about that choice in the first place. What does it mean to us? And therefore, how do we make that fit? So top line sales is more important to you to your business than bottom line. That's a very different way of defining than how you look at return on investment. But what I would say with my measurement hat on is definitely you want to have some sort of measure of that return on investment.
Mm-hmm. And I would say have a team and an organisation that better represents the people you're trying to communicate with. And you know, I think you need one of 2 things to succeed. One is that you produce content. You know, you have programming principles and you produce great content that in turn produces the second thing, which is real human beings congregate around that content on a frequent enough basis for that to be valuable. And I think if you figure out a way to work as directly with that source of insight and prevent going down the rabbit hole of working with maybe intermediaries that might amount to nothing more than Chinese whispers, then I think you'll start to become huge, well, if you're not already, hugely effective across all of the channels that you want to exist in.
Excellent. So I think we've solved effectiveness now from media. So I'd like to thank everyone on the panel and their insights and their tips and tricks that they can do to push things forward. Hopefully it's been interesting for you and effective for you guys. And I'd like to thank Tara. I've been pronouncing your name wrong the whole time. I apologise. Tara, Craig and Dean for their lively discussion today. So thank you very much, guys.